Hey everyone, glad to be back with you all again. After doing multiple videos on titles with pretty large and passionate fan bases, I thought I'd make my next video on a game that I don't see getting as much attention. Granada here came out 30 years ago among a very large market of other shooters and pretty much got left in the dust while other companies like Toaplan were understandably rising to the top. The Sega Genesis version here was the only way to play it in the United States, though. Those who did play it said that they generally enjoyed it a lot and found it to be pretty underrated. Were they telling the truth? Strap in, and we'll see just how well Granada for the Sega Genesis holds up today. Released in 1990 for both the Sharp X68000 home computer and the Sega Genesis about 3 months later, Granada is a top-down shooter, putting you in control of a powerful tank in order to stop a large-scale war in Africa during the future year of 2016. The game was developed by Wolf Team, who you may now know as Namco Tales Studio. Yes, the very same studio that would develop Tales of Fantasia and kickstart the entire JRPG franchise we've come to know now, had its beginnings developing action and shooter titles, before delving into RPGs not long after. Unlike their previous titles, Granada was the first game by Wolf Team to place a greater emphasis on its gameplay than its story. Here's the little bit of story that we do get, though keep in mind there are some slight differences between the Genesis and home computer versions, and I only have the Genesis version's instruction manual to go by here. In the distant year of 2016, civil war has erupted in Africa over some rare metals that were recently discovered. New weapons with nuclear capabilities, called maneuverceptors, or MCs for short, would escalate the war and try to bring it to a close. Unexpectedly, units from both the north and south began to get wiped out rapidly by an unknown MC, simply known as Granada. Granada, also known as the God of Africa or Ghost of a Soldier, is a special MC tank, also known as a hypertech cannon tank, with unknown origins, piloted by a man named Leon Toto, a mercenary who picked up the MC in Tabora after being deceived by an agent within his own group, Private Enterprises. Now, he fights for retribution. The controls are easy enough to learn, though difficult to master, especially when trying to keep your cool under pressure. Your D-pad moves you in all 4 directions as well as diagonal. The A button is your basic shot, the B button holds your shooting position in place so you can strafe in any direction, and C is your special cannon shot, which is 16 times more powerful than a regular blast, but has a slow firing rate, as well as a recoil that you need to pay attention to. The most important function of all this is the B button, however. Holding down the button, you can keep aiming in whatever direction you point the tank towards, and keep dodging enemy fire while moving. It also helps you angle your shots significantly better. Without this one function, the game would likely be impossible to beat as is. Funny enough, the original X68000 version only had 2 attack buttons, forcing you to press them simultaneously for the third action. So being able to use 3 separate buttons for all of these functions here is a relief. Now let's talk about the level structure. Each of the game's 9 stages has you diving through wide open areas to find and destroy multiple targets, all before coming to a large-scale boss fight at the end. In order to find these targets, there's a mini-map in the bottom right-hand corner, which displays all of the targets in red dots. While it doesn't tell you exactly where you're supposed to go, as it's not a real map, it does give you an idea of what direction you'll need to head in to reach your targets in time. From there, you're pretty much free to explore the level in whatever direction and order of targets you want, with the bosses appearing in the same place at the end of each stage. But while this may be simple to explain, it's not exactly simple to accomplish. For one thing, you are timed. While the game usually gives you enough time to explore a stage without suffering any consequences, it gets harder to succeed as you get deeper into things and start exploring areas with a lot more roadblocks and set pathways that you have to traverse to reach your targets. Running out of time also forces you to lose a life, which you really can't afford to do, as every single life is invaluable to your success. The next point of difficulty comes, of course, from the barrage of enemies you'll see coming from all sides. It can be very difficult to dodge enemy fire sometimes, and death is not always going to feel avoidable. This isn't helped by the fact that some enemies and bullets can appear from off-screen with little warning. Multiple enemies with a lot of shots firing on-screen can also lead to bits of slowdown. While it's understandable, it can make the whole experience a little rougher on occasion. You'll also encounter some power-ups that aid you in additional fire and angling shots. These become especially useful in the stages with long hallways, since you have less room to dodge enemy fire, and areas with corners so you can destroy enemies without even having to go near them. It takes a little practice to get used to, but it can make your life a lot easier once you do. The environments between each level have enough distinctions that you never feel like you're scrolling through the same areas again and again. There's even a few, like the floating airbase in Stage 2 or the cybernetic scenery in Stage 9, that make excellent use of parallax scrolling, the technique where the background moves in unison with your character and adjusts itself accordingly. Unique to this version of the game is Stage 7, which was not in the original X68000 version of the game. While it's not terribly different from the other stages in terms of gameplay, it does have multiple areas with different scenery around them, and a load of items to help shield you on top of its interesting boss fight design. Speaking of, the boss fights themselves may be my favorite thing in the entire game. Each enemy design is completely unique and has its own special set of attacks that you'll need to memorize in order to defeat them. These enemies range from four-legged jumping weapons, to well-shielded robots with a small opening for damage, to caterpillar-like robots with destructible limbs, all the way to flying mechs that take up almost the entire screen. Some of these would even end up feeling like solving a puzzle more than fighting a target. Each one of these fights made me feel very accomplished by the time I'd beaten them. I especially liked the ridiculous nature of the final battle. While I wouldn't go as far as to call this game a bullet hell shooter, referring to those games where bullets pretty much cover the screen at all times, I would say that this fight came dangerously close to it. After you've taken out all of its armor pieces and blown up the core, we reach the game's ending. It doesn't give us much, but states that Leon has now lost his Granada following the fight, and will have to fight the remaining Private Enterprise Intelligence Department forces on his own. After this, we see Leon walk away in that cool guy walking away from an explosion pose we all love so much, as the credits begin to roll. With all of that said, I will admit that the game is not perfect, especially if you're playing the Genesis version. For one thing, outside of the extra stage and easier to use control scheme, this is arguably the inferior version of the game. The graphical palette and colors are not nearly as vibrant, and the soundtrack is not quite as powerful from an audio fidelity standpoint, though I still enjoyed it anyway. There are also animated sequences and pixel art that sadly had to be removed. With all of that said, however, the Genesis version is nice enough on its own, and I still consider it a worthwhile port to anyone in the US who can get their hands on a copy. I'll also address the remaining elephant in the room. The game is exceptionally hard, and not always for the right reasons. Enemies and shots can appear from pretty much any direction without warning, forcing you to learn through trial and error. You're given a total of up to 6 lives depending on what you choose in the options menu, and difficulty settings ranging from easy to mania. Choosing easy will give you more health points, while hard gives you the least. You're also given 3 continues, which will start you from the beginning of whatever stage you were on. This may seem like a generous amount of chances, but once you get started, you'll quickly see that it's not much and that you really need to master each stage properly before you can reach the end. And although the game encourages exploration, its timer does not, making you have to move around pretty quickly to avoid losing any lives in the process. I am not afraid to admit that I played and beat this game on its easy mode the first time with 6 lives per continue, and will likely try normal mode with 3 lives next, now that I've gotten used to the stages, as well as all of the traps that the game has ready to throw at me. While the game was excruciatingly difficult at times, I still felt a drive to keep going and trying again, even after getting my first game over screen 7 levels in and having to start over from the beginning. Perhaps it was testament to the excellent control layout, but I never felt too frustrated to the point of wanting to give up, and that's a huge plus in my eyes. While I don't think I'd put this game above most of the excellent shooters we've seen from companies like Toaplan, I do think that this game is surprisingly underrated all things considered, and deserves to be played by those looking for a good top-down shooter experience, especially if you enjoy wide-open areas to explore, really unique boss battles, and the feeling of satisfaction you generally get from blowing up a mech robot 5 times your size. Copies of Granada have become a little harder to find on the resale market now, but for action shooter fans looking for a little exploration room and creative level design to go with the over-the-top boss fights, it's more than worthy of your time. And that's going to do it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Have you played this game before yourself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're feeling generous, please consider donating to my Patreon, where awesome people like Brandon, Thomas, Johan, Cielo, and Andrew all help keep this channel going. Until next time.